Hi, welcome to the KWAhnDo Show. My name is Grandmaster Chuck Beiersdorfer, and today we have the pleasure of having an interview with Grandmaster Stephen Hayes. He's one of America's true ninjas. Welcome, Grandmaster Hayes.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
It's always great to see you. Always have such a positive attitude. And we're going to barrel you with some questions now, so you better be ready, okay? Grandmaster Hayes, what martial arts did you first start?
Well, you know, when I was a teenager, I wanted to study martial arts like crazy, but I lived in Dayton, Ohio, and there were no teachers around that I could find. And I finally got to Miami University as a freshman, and there were a bunch of Navy officers with the ROTC program teaching Toshin Do. And I wasn't in the Navy, but I managed to talk my way into their club. And so I began with Toshin Do in the 60s, ate it up. I loved it. And my mother was afraid I was going to flunk out of college because I was always in the training hall.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. So did that for almost 10 years.
10 years. And that's kind of our connection with Grandmaster On.
Yeah.
Because you studied Toshin Do, I studied Toshin Do. That's kind of our roots. And you had the pleasure of training with my Grandmaster well before I trained with him. How was it like training with Grandmaster On in the day?
Well, you know, it was, nobody knew anything about martial arts. I mean, there were no TV shows, there were no movies, there were certainly no internet or anything like that. So it was a great mystery. And a lot of us students, we thought, you know, we were honored to be able to study with these great Korean and Japanese and Chinese teachers. And, you know, that's something I think is very different today, you know. I mean, there are martial arts schools everywhere, and no, we had to take it very seriously. I mean, the way we behaved and the way we treated them, and the techniques, you know, were unheard of. Americans would like boxing or wrestling, and we would never think to kick, or we would never know the refinements of how to strike, where you could transmit so much more power than just raw. It was fabulous. It was fabulous.
And it was funny because when I was younger, if you kicked when you were fighting, you were a sissy or you were cheating. You weren't allowed to kick when you're fighting. Now that's what we do.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
makes more sense. So you studied Toshin Do, and then you moved to Japan, from what I understand, to study Ninjutsu.
Mm-hmm.
What style was the school you studied in Japan? What style was their school?
Yeah. Well, it was the Togakure Ryu. Ryu means like system. It was in its 34th generation. It had been handed down, but it was like an illegal activity in the several hundred years ago, 1,500 years ago. The ninja were espionage agents. They were doer of clandestine deeds, and so it wasn't always a clear bloodline handing down through all the generations like there would be in the samurai martial arts that were, you know, supported by the government, supported by taxation. So I studied this Togakure Ryu, and you know how I got into that. When I was in high school, a friend of mine gave me a James Bond novel, You Only Live Twice. And in this James Bond novel, James Bond is sent to Japan. And he studies with, it says right in the book, he studies with the Togakure ninja. And he has a bad guy he's trying to infiltrate. And so they find this beautiful Japanese girl from the seacoast island of Kyushu that he marries. And then the story goes on from there. And, you know, of course, his job was to protect the monarch, protect the queen. And so it was years later, long after I'd moved back to America, you know, I tell people, it's a funny story. I realized, hey, I did that. This high school fantasy. I went to Japan and studied with the Togakure ninja. I married what I think of as a beautiful girl from a seacoast island of Kyushu. And in the 1990s and into the 2000s, I worked as the security advisor and escort for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So he's the king of Tibet if the Chinese hadn't invaded. So I did that too. I was supporting the monarch. So I jokingly tell people, be careful what you read in high school, you know?
Yeah, yeah. You were a James Bond in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, my fantasy.
And you've told me before that when you first started training in ninjutsu at the school, they invited you in, but they pretty much used you as an uke.
Yeah, I didn't know that, you know. I mean, I showed up, I wore a necktie and a suit, and I thought, you know, there's all these formal things you go through to get into a Japanese traditional martial arts school. And they said, oh, come in tomorrow night. You can train with these guys. And I was amazed, you know. It's just that easy. You're going to accept me. And years later, some of the seniors explained to my wife, oh, we never thought he'd stick around. We just used him as a training dummy. He was pretty big, you know. We were all small in that generation of Japan. And we thought, you know, we'll try our stuff out on him. He'll think we're crazy and leave, and we can get back to training. And I just never left.
You liked it?
Well, you know, the stuff that they did. I'd studied, you know, martial arts for 10 years. And this is back in the 60s. There was no cross-training back in the 60s.
That's true.
And the ninja art was so old that it kind of predated the separation and what was called the Meiji era, about our Civil War. When we had our Civil War, the Meiji era started, and people would just practice the sword. Right. These people would just practice grappling. These people would just practice throwing shuriken. These people would practice karate. It was brought in from Okinawa in like the 1920s. There were all these pieces, and the ninja art was so old. It was from before they separated these things. So we learned grappling and chokes and locks and sword and staff and
all kinds of weapons.
All kinds of weapons and a distinct way of thinking. It was kind of different from the conventional Japanese martial arts, and I just ate it up. I mean, it was what I...
Well, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
And you opened a ninjutsu school here in the Dayton area.
I did, yeah. For several years, my wife and I, she trains in the ninja martial art as well, and so we would go back to Japan. We'd take our little tiny girls, drop them off with my wife's parents down in Kyushu, and we'd train. And I wrote books and did an occasional seminar, but I didn't want to have a school that, you know, would hold me down. I needed to be different places. And so finally, in the mid-1990s, we started a school in Dayton. And I had several of my friends who started schools around the country. We had kind of a little league of ninjutsu teachers.
Oh, wow. That's your school is still open in Kettering today.
Yeah, it is. We sold it to the guy who, you know, kind of ran it for me. And Rumiko and I now have kind of taken off, sort of gone back to where we started from. We're trying new things, and you know, how can we help? You know, there's a big difference in 2025 America and 1980 America. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, there's like 3 generations difference, and young people today think differently.
Absolutely.
We have so many more like inventions, and what do people need right now? What do they want right now that our ninja martial art, we call it Toshin Do. To is sword, and Shin is kind of heart and mind, and Do is the pathway.
The way, yeah.
And we had to kind of change it, because what I studied was the old-time ninja fighting method, how people fought in the 1500s in Japan, and it's very different than how they fight in America. And so to serve the American people and European people, I had to adjust. We kept the principles the same, but like the attacks in America, people might start attacks with some kind of verbal thing or a positioning. Old Japan, the 1500s, no, it was like murder right away.
Yeah, it's over with.
And those were not things I was taught in Japan. They were teaching the old style. Everything would start from here or go to here to here to here. Somebody's on the ground. I mean, you can't justify that as legal self-defense today.
Yeah, you can go to jail.
You go to jail. Oh, God.
Who is your nemesis?
I had a guy in California that was just obsessed with me. He claimed he was a ninja too, you know, and I read his story and just cracked up. You know, it was like a funny ninja movie kind of thing. And you know, I've had a lot of people that, you know, they saw me. I had an adventure. I wrote, you know, 20-some books. I've had a blessed life. I've had a really blessed life. I did what I wanted to do. I was also involved in some of the spiritual technologies from Japan and later Tibet. And I wanted to do this for me. And, you know, there were other people who, there was a meme on Facebook that said, the people below always attack the ones above, but the ones above never attack the people below. And, you know, that's kind of true. That's kind of true, you know. So I would have, oh, well, Stephen Hayes just made this stuff up, or, oh, I bet he's no good, or, you know, this kind of chatter. And my response, just ignore it. And if somebody asked me, they'd say, well, what about this guy? He said you're a phony. I would just laugh. Oh, those silly guys, you know. Let me tell you about my program.
Here, sign the contract. Could you? How many months you want to train? We'll explain it to you. But it's you've touched hundreds and thousands of lives, and teaching your ninjutsu to people from all over. I know people. One of my family members trains with you. You know, trained with you for a long time, and the day we were talking, and he goes, well, I trained with Stephen Hayes. I go, really? It was like, wow, the connection that happens. Like you training with Grandmaster On, I train with Grandmaster On. But it's always an honor to be in your presence, because you just have a atmosphere about yourself of confidence, and you're always so well spoken. So I want to thank you for coming in and having an interview with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I always enjoy spending time with you, Chuck.
Thank you, sir. And what I can say is Kamsahamnida. Grandmaster Hayes, who was your favorite martial arts actor?
Well, I would have to say it was Toshiro Mifune, who was in a bunch of 1950s, 1960s samurai movies. Maybe the most famous over here was Seven Samurai.
Oh, yeah.
That he had this bearing, and he really wasn't a sword expert, but he could pull these things off in the movies. And I got a chance to be in a movie with him. Shogun was filmed, and he played the Japanese general. And so that was a highlight of my life.
That was back in the day. So what is your favorite martial arts movie?
You know, it's really kind of hard to say, because there are some movies that enjoy depicting a fight like art. You know, I make a move here, she makes a move there, you know. But There was a kind of little-known movie called Atomic Blonde. Did you see that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Oh God, what? You know, Charlize Theron was in it, and I mean, those fights were brutal, and they were honest. People were running, they were gassed, and you know, pounding on each other. And after the fight, they're talking to her, and you know, she still has a split lip, and this is so real. I mean, it was so gritty, and the fight was amazing. And I think the Jason Bourne movies. Oh God, you know those
The
fights.
technique was really good.
Yeah, those fights were so realistic, and you know, as opposed to like Hong Kong kung fu movie where you know they're promoting an art. This was just a fight.
Or the movies where you hit a guy 17 times and he's still coming up, and there's no blood on his face. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Is that real martial arts, or what is that?
Yeah.
How do you feel that the martial arts are portrayed in the movies today? Do you think it's in a realistic, or do you think it's more of cinemistic?
That's an interesting question. I think, you know, it kind of depends on maybe what the purpose of the movie is, you know. So like real popular right now is this Cobra Kai TV show. Well, they never really wrestle with each other. They never, I mean, this is the age of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Exactly.
I'm amazed that they haven't had some kind of a Jiu-Jitsu bad guy in there or whatever. And everything's very precise. And, you know, so there's one approach to doing a movie. Another approach would be like, oh, what was it? There was a James Bond movie where, I think it was called Spectre. It was Spectre. And there was this brutal guy that agreed to take out James Bond. I mean, he was just brutal. And wow, that fight was, you know, eventually Bond tricks this guy and gets him choked out. And but very different, you know, Cobra Kai and this James Bond fight. So I think, are we telling a story? Are we promoting a martial art? Are we focusing on how things are done as opposed to what the results are? But today's movies range over the whole thing. You know, John Wick. Well, is John Wick fighting realistic? I don't think so. I personally don't think it's realistic. It's cool to see, you know, and it's very well choreographed, but, you know, people are hitting the head and they get up, and I don't think it's realistic. It's exciting to watch. I don't think it's realistic as opposed to this, you know, James Bond and Spectre, where, God, that was a brutal fight.
Wow.
A brutal fight.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh, my last question would be Toshin Do. It's your style. It's your system. You tell me about Toshin Do. You explain to me what it means, but tell me about it.
Well, as I had referred to it earlier, I studied the historical ninja martial art, and it's very different from the Tang Soo Do that I studied before, and it's very different from a lot of other Japanese karate, judo, and when I began to introduce it to America, I came back and I was doing seminars in the early 80s. Well, there were a lot of tough guys, you know, kickboxers. KWAhnDo was, you know, the big thing back then. Kickboxing and eskrima and the Philippine arts were all coming in there. And, you know, I'd have a group of like 90 people. I'm there doing a seminar. You know, I'm teaching. I'm in teacher mode. Somebody else figures, oh, if I take this guy out, I can be on the cover of Black Belt magazine. And so there were about 13 times in my career where all of a sudden this knucklehead's trying to take me out. And the techniques that they were doing were very different from the historical things that I had studied. And by a miracle, I was able to save myself 13 times. But I noticed I had to adjust what I was doing to fit the American kickboxer, eskrima. That opened my eyes. And so we can't call it ninjutsu because that's 1500s. So we took the nin of ninja, and I separated the two kanji. So the top is separated, becomes sword, and the bottom becomes heart and spirit. So I thought this was so clever. We took the nin kanji and we separated it, and it's pronounced Toshin. Toshin and Do is Michi. A person's going to study this for their whole life. It's an approach to how do I live an effective life. Probably a lot of your own students experience this too. We're rarely ever attacked by a razor slasher in an alley,
Right.
Yeah, but go to work, and there's some wise guy or, somebody's going to attack us emotionally or attack us spiritually even, or try to position themselves. And how do we maintain that inner understanding? Oh, I know what this guy's doing. I know what you're doing. And not get hooked into this kind of, I call it emotional violence. I think average person is going to experience emotional violence a lot more than physical violence. And so the Toshin has several, the physical techniques. And then also there are we even have like verbal kata, little things that you would practice saying over and over again. So when we're under pressure, that's what comes out.
Example?
Well, like everybody these days, carries a cell phone, and so if a fight breaks out, everybody's, if I'm caught saying, "Hey, jerk, bring it on," or you're going to be sorry that you started something, this tough guy language, that ends up in court, and of course the dirtbags always get good lawyers. The first thing the lawyer is going to ask me is, how many years now have you studied this Japanese assassin method? And so we say, hey, no need for violence. Hey, no need for violence. He says, oh, well, we say, I don't want to fight you. No, don't say, I don't want to fight you. That's why this guy, he doesn't want to fight either. He wants to administer a beating.
Right.
So he said, I don't want to fight you. Yeah, that's why I'm going after you, pal. Said, no need for violence. No need for violence. And what a strange thing to say. And then if you have a tiniest grin, hey, no need for violence. But you got to say it from here. You can't say it from up here. Oh, no need for violence. No, you got to be grounded to where this person thinks this is weird. So we have these little phrases that people practice, and that's even tough. Because a 14-year-old boy is going to be bullied differently in a locker room than a 27-year-old woman who's working. So we got to have different things for these different people to say. But the students enjoy it. They enjoy it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and we even have a thing where sometimes, we're practicing a technique, and we have the students start a technique, and if I smile and wave, that means I'm your friend.
Yeah.
So you, of course, don't respond violently, but how many times, we just get used to doing this. We just get used to doing this. And no, you on the street, you got to make up your mind. Is this a real thing or whatever? So if all of a sudden we smile and wave, I relax, I back away a little bit, maybe send a smile back. Anyway, these are just parts of making a modern self-defense martial art available to the American public.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so very much.